Peace. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Prezzavia Prelo, and on behalf of Louisville Seminary and our Black Church Studies program, we want to welcome you to this evening's Faith Talk, where the Black Church speaks. We've been convening for the last few weeks this series called Faith Talks, where the Black Church speaks. We've been inviting different Black religious leaders to share on a topic that is connected to their scholarship or their practice of ministry connected to the Black Church. It gives me great joy this evening to welcome Dr. Harold Trulear, who is a professor of practical theology at Howard University School of Divinity. He will come soon with the topic, the Black Church and Criminal Justice. But first, I'd like to share a little bit about Dr. Trulear and our speaker for this evening. Reverend Harold Dean Trulear, PhD, is the Executive Director of the Black Congregations Resource Center and Associate Professor of Applied Theology at Howard University School of Divinity. A graduate of Morehouse College, BA, and Drew University, PhD, he directs a national research and demonstration project called Healing Communities USA, mobilizing congregations to support those returning from incarceration through the establishment of family and social support networks. With Charles Lewis and W. Wilson Good, he co-edited the book Ministry with Prisoners and Families, The Way Forward, published in 2011 by Judson Press. His book, Balancing Justice with Mercy, an Interfaith Guide to Creating Healing Communities, was released in September 2021, while his newest book, Welcome Home, Reflected Essays for Returning Citizens, is currently being used as a pre-release curriculum in over 100 jail facilities. Reverend Trulear is married to Reverend Brenda J. Trulear, the director of Salt and Light Ministry Institute. It gives me great joy to welcome the Reverend Dr. Harold Dean Trulear as he comes to share on the topic, the Black Church and Criminal Justice. And also this evening, I'm so delighted to welcome Dr. Trulear, and that he and I worked together at Howard University School of Divinity before I was called to Louisville Seminary. So we want to welcome you, Dr. Trulear. And after your talk, we'll do introductions with the audience that is here, and they can introduce themselves as they ask questions. But the floor is yours. We're so excited and thankful for the opportunity to share with you as you come, as the Spirit leads you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prelo. It's good to see you. We miss you at Howard, but I know you're doing great things at Louisville Presbyterian. And I actually got the privilege of meeting Dr. Prelo prior to her coming to Howard when she was a featured speaker in our conference at the Black Congregations Resource Center. It was supposed to be the church in the post-pandemic age, but we underestimated the length of the pandemic. And so she held forth as the pastor of 15th Street Presbyterian Church, and on the topic of pastoring through the pandemic. And so it is good to be able to work with you again. And thank you all for being here. I see familiar faces. I must acknowledge Chaplain Michelle Reynolds, a recent graduate of Howard Divinity School, and the lead chaplain at the Arlington Detention Center in Arlington, Virginia, and who also works with us at the Black Congregations Resource Center. So I'm going to, I have share screen capability? Yes, good. Okay. Everyone can see my screen. I changed the topic just a little bit. I changed it to the Black Church and the criminal legal system because much of what we know about how what is called the criminal justice system works is really not just. And so one of the things that I'll be mentioning in various parts of the conversation will be how our language shapes the narrative around which we encounter and minister to those impacted by incarceration and by what my friend Vinny Schiraldi calls mass supervision. which is his umbrella term for probation, parole, and all forms of non-confinement supervision. So when we're talking about the criminal legal system, and to start off, um, what I want to do is get us thinking about justice. Okay, here we go. My computer's a little slow, evidently. I want us to start with a woman who encountered the criminal legal system. That's Rosa Parks. And I call this Rosa Parks' dream. Rosa Parks dreams that she's being arrested in 2025. And subsequent to her arrest, and this is a good example of why I use the term criminal legal system, because Rosa Parks' behavior was what we call criminalized behavior. She did break the law by not giving up her seat. And so I choose to use the term criminalized behavior versus committing a crime because there are behaviors that were criminalized in one system that are not criminalized in another, right? Slavery was legal. It wasn't just, but it was legal, right? And to help someone who was enslaved escape was a crime. I choose to call that criminalized behavior, right? Because it's the imposition of a legal system or of a legal designation onto a particular behavior, like teaching an enslaved person to read and write, criminalized behavior. Okay. So in her dream, she's 2025, and she turns to the church after her arrest. What can she expect from the church? Well, one church says, we'll pray for you. And that seems to be a pretty consistent response that churches have when someone gets into some kind of trouble. We'll pray for you. And I'm not suggesting the prayer is bad, but I would like to suggest that it's an inadequate response in and of itself. Then along comes a church that says, we have a van visit ministry, we'll give you a ride. Now, why would I even bring that up? Because what what giving Rosa Parks a ride does is it solves her personal problem without addressing the systemic problem. So one of the things that I try to stress with students and with pastors is that giving away food or having a food pantry is an act of charity, it's an act of love, but it's not necessarily an act of justice. The question is, why don't people have food, right? Why don't we have a food desert? Why is the cost of food the way it is? Why is food inaccessible? And so when a student comes to me and says, we have a food pantry and that's going to solve hunger, my response is, well, you just gave Rosa Parks a ride. Maybe she went to a suburban church that for help, and they responded by doing a book study. And I made my little joke here: the next Jim Crow, mass transportation in an era of colorblindness. They study the problem, they read, they have a book society, right? They but and that's what we do sometimes in seminary, theological education. We read about an issue, we study about it, but we don't do anything about it. And she goes to another church. Oh, she went to one of those mega churches, right? They said, Rosa Parks, they discriminate against you in the bus. What you ought to do is ask God for a car, claim a car in the name of Jesus, and especially a Jag, and get a Jag, right? You know, if you're going to talk to God about this, you know, get a big God. It's a big God. Ask God for a big car. Well, of course, we would all agree that these are inadequate responses to Rosa Parks' situation. However, they all represent ways in which the church has responded, especially in 2025, to injustice. I want to suggest that a full gospel response is one that does involve prayer, but it also involves letting justice roll down like waters. It does involve giving people rides when necessary to help them with their personal situation, but also 5,000 people met to put together a boycott in Montgomery. They organized against the system. So then when we talk about justice, we're really talking about ministering to a system and getting a handle on dealing with a system, the criminal legal system. And one way to think about that is to think about it as being more than charity. We all know this saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and to feed him for a lifetime. If I gave you that first part of that quote, you'd give me the second part of the quote. But Dr. Luis Cortez of Esperanza University in Philadelphia adds to it. He says, if you don't have access to the water, it doesn't matter that I've taught you how to fish. So let me sit with that for a second. I taught you how to fish, but if you don't have access to the pond, it doesn't matter. If you have a criminal record and that means you can't get a fishing license, it doesn't matter. If you went to a substandard school and can't read well enough to fill out the fishing license application, it doesn't matter. If you can't afford the fishing gear to go fishing because you don't have a job, it doesn't matter that I've taught you how to fish. If there's no public transportation that accesses your neighborhood and connects it to the water because the people who have made the decisions about where to build public transportation have not included your neighborhood, it doesn't matter that I've taught you how to fish. Access to the pond, that's justice. Justice is giving people access. And so the old Baptist hymn, Take Me to the Water, is really about social justice ministry. How do we change systems? And so one of the things that we have to think about as in the church is how do we change the system, the criminal legal system, so that people have access to the water? The on ramp for systems change is given to me by C. Wright Mills, the sociologist, who, in his 1959 book, The Sociological Imagination, said that every public issue is the amalgam of personal troubles. Every public issue is the amalgam of personal troubles. C. Wright Mills, The Sociological Imagination, 1959. What Mills is saying is that you can break down every public issue, whether it's public safety, whether it's education, whether it's gender justice. You can take all of these public issues and find within them individual persons or families who are impacted by that issue, and it's the amalgam of their personal experience that makes the issue a public issue. Carl Dudley, the late sociologist of religion, says that one of the things that churches are good at is using personal stories, those personal troubles, personal trials, as on ramps to changing public issues. And so, if I want to make changes in the criminal legal system, I need to start with a personal trial, with family stories. And this is one story that I'm familiar with, that I've been involved with. This is a woman named Beverly Walker. She's holding a picture of her husband, Barron. Beverly lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The zip code is 53206. That's the zip code in the United States that has the highest percentage of incarcerated males in the United States. 63%. That is not a typo. 63% of all Black males in Milwaukee 53206 go to state prison. Not get arrested, not go to jail, go to state prison. 63%. Barron Walker, Beverly's husband, is one of them. When Barron went to prison, he was sentenced to consecutive 20-year terms. He had the possibility of parole if he went through some programs. But 5 years into his sentence, the Wisconsin state legislature passed new legislation called Truth in Sentencing that eliminated the possibility of what we call discretionary parole. That means early release because of good behavior and program participation, etc., and mandated that all sentences be served just as they were handed out. Well, Barron was given 20-year consecutive sentences. So that meant that instead of being eligible for parole 1/3 of the way into his sentence, he had to do the full 40 years. Beverly was heartbroken. She was devastated. She went to her church and told them, and the church said, well, you're still a young woman. You're still attractive. Maybe you should find somebody else. She said, well, you told us it was death to us till death do us part. And Beverly said, well, it was till death do us part. And the church said, well, look, it's we know, but you probably should find somebody else. So she left her church. She went to a church that had a very active prison ministry, and she figured that they would help her and they would understand. And the church said, what prison is your husband in? She said, he's in the Fox Lakes Correctional Facility. They said, oh, we have a prison ministry. We don't go to Fox Lake. Finally, she went to a church where the people didn't look like her, and they said they would be glad to help her. They heard her cry, they heard the pain of her and her family, her children and her grandchildren, and they connected her with a community organizing group there in Milwaukee that eventually organized enough churches to go to the Wisconsin, take the case to the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, where the law of truth in sentencing was ruled unconstitutional because it had been made retroactive to sentences that were given out prior to the enacting of the law. And as a result of that, Barron was released. You see him on the left with Beverly and myself at a reception that we held for him at the Congressional Black Caucus. Um, this was a church that heard Beverly's cry. It was a personal trial that was an on ramp to a public issue. In her personal trial, she experienced what we call disenfranchised grief. And disenfranchised grief, psychologists tell us, is a type of mourning, a type of grief that is not credited by the community. When a person dies, we grieve, and the church surrounds them. The church credits the grief. The church validates the grief. How do we do that? We visit the grieving family. We take food to the grieving family. We even have religious rituals for the grieving family. We call them funerals, wakes, and viewings. We go with the grieving family to the cemetery. We have a repast for the grieving family afterwards. We check in on the grieving family afterwards. We walk with them through their 5 stages of Kubler-Ross. We have all these things that we do that credit and validate the grief. When a mother's son goes to prison, when Ms. Walker's husband goes to prison, when the woman on the right-hand side, Yvette Clausen, who was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole as an adolescent for killing her abuser, goes to prison when her mother goes through disenfranchised grief. And so when we get in touch with the disenfranchised grief of the people around us, the families in our midst, then we are in a position to organize around criminal justice reform. We move from the personal trial to the public issue. We created this healing communities model to help congregations to engage in the healing and restoration process by treating the prison or jail in the same manner as the hospital. What do I mean by that? In Matthew 25, it talks about visiting sick people and visiting prisoners and feeding the hungry and clothing the naked. Well, when somebody from your church gets sick, the church gets involved. The pastor goes to see them. People send cards, they send letters, right? There is a movement within the congregation to take care of the person from the congregation, or maybe a family member of somebody in the congregation. If somebody in the congregation goes to prison, they get the volunteers from the church that's assigned to that prison. What we're saying is that churches ought to identify families within their own congregation, supporting their own members, individuals and families affected by crime, incarceration, and prison reentry, and begin the ministry in the same place, especially if you're going to make it an on ramp to justice reform. You have disenfranchised grief in your congregation Sunday after Sunday. The sheer numbers are such that it's impossible to have a congregation in this country where no one in the church is affected or impacted by mass incarceration. This also creates space for reconciliation because very often the family that's left behind is hurt, has been betrayed, needs the kind of restorative justice that we try to practice with regards to restoring individuals to community in our neighborhoods. And it also develops what I'm calling the service to advocacy pipeline. The idea that if we start with the personal trials and then we begin to see the amalgamation of those personal trials throughout the congregation, we're in a position to build a movement. In the training guide that we developed, we try to answer these 5 questions. How can we identify families of the incarcerated in our congregation? How can we help our church? How can our church reduce the shame and stigma of incarceration? And that's related to the first one. That's shame and stigma get in the way of identifying those who are in the system. How can we provide bridges between the church, incarcerated people, and their families? How can we keep families connected during the incarceration period? What public policy should our congregation investigate to ensure restorative justice? And what biblical resources can we employ to address crime and incarceration in our church and community? One of the ways we start is with language. I mentioned earlier that when we talk about the criminal legal system, I happen to be a formerly incarcerated person. I use the term returning citizen to describe myself rather than an ex felon or an ex con or an ex prisoner because no one wants to be defined by their past. And as soon as you talk about someone as being an ex whatever, you're defining them in terms of their past. Justice involved is another way in which we are trying to reduce the stigma surrounding incarceration by using that terminology to describe those who are moving through the system. We've talked earlier about the criminal legal system. Even the concept of juvenile justice is stigmatizing, right? Because nobody uses the term juvenile except to talk about young people whose behavior has been criminalized, right? I have 3 adult children. When they were teenagers, I never said, I'd like you to meet my juveniles, right? We don't use that language except when we're talking about the criminal legal system. And so, following the lead of the Children's Defense Fund, we've been using this new language, right? This new thinking, talking about youth justice, the criminal legal system, justice involved rather than incarcerated, rather than the term prisoners. I use the term residents when I talk about people who are incarcerated, right? I'm, and we're beginning to see some movement in the system itself as there are criminal legal systems that are beginning to use some of this terminology as people of faith and goodwill try to reframe the narrative and humanize the language, because without humanizing the language, we're never going to be able to work for justice for those who are impacted. It also means a new lens on scripture. And that new lens on scripture is simply what it means to look at the scriptures through the eyes of the reality of incarceration and criminal legal system. I had a student at Howard once who told me, I don't see how you deal with those people. And I said, what do you mean those people? She said, the prisoners. And I said, well, I used to be a prisoner. Why, what, you don't, she said, oh, you're different. You're different. I said, no, I'm not different. She said, well, you know what I mean. And she had gotten arrested for a traffic stop in one of those small towns where they lock you up until you pay bail. And she had been in the holding cell and they were so nasty. And I said, she said, I don't see how you deal with them. I said, well, can I borrow your Bible? She said, why? I said, because if you can't deal with those people, we got to take stuff out the Bible. Isn't that why you came to seminary? For us to get you straight on the Bible. So I said, first, we'll get rid of the book of Genesis because Joseph was a prisoner. Second, we'll get rid of the book of Jeremiah because he was in solitary confinement. Then we'll take out the book of Daniel because Daniel was a 2-time loser and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were on death row. If you don't like those people, we got to get rid of the book of Revelation because John wrote that while he was confined. If you don't like those people, you got to get rid of the book First and Second Peter because Peter got locked up. If you don't like those people, you got to stop telling people I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me because that was written by a man who was locked up. And if you don't like those people, you're probably in the wrong religion because Jesus died in custody. And I told that story at a church in Delaware, and the man came up to me and said, now, Reverend, that's different. Those were good people that got locked up. And I said, okay, so you want to talk about bad people? I said, what about if a guy walks down the street and he sees his friend being beaten up by his boss, and he jumps in the middle of the fight and kills the boss? Should he lock him up? He said, yeah, lock him up. I said, well, you just locked up Moses, right? And you can lock up David for you know for raping Bathsheba and then having her husband killed. And what are you going to do with Peter? Peter pulled a knife on a cop. That's felony law. That's felony assault on a law enforcement officer. And not only did Peter pull a knife on a cop, 3 months later he's preaching. You wouldn't let him in your parking lot, right? But new lenses, new lenses on scripture. we rely on people who've been through their own respective criminal legal systems in the Bible. And part of what that helps us do is to reduce the stigma and reduce the shame around mass incarceration when we recognize that most of the people, many of the people that we idolize in scripture, right? Nobody stopped saying the 23rd Psalm because of what David did to Bathsheba and Uriah. Nobody stopped. Oh, we can't, no cancel culture. We didn't cancel Psalm 23 because of what David did. So we reduce the shame. We increase the visitation, the connection, the relationships. One of the things that we've learned is a recidivism reduction strategy is building relationships. In fact, believe it or not, relationships are twice as impactful on reducing recidivism as jobs and housing, and 4 times as impactful as educational levels and substance abuse treatment. Relationships and values change are the two most significant factors, according to the research that we've done over the last 25 years, in reducing recidivism. In fact, the Minnesota Department of Corrections did a study, a 5-year longitudinal study, and found that any visit of an incarcerated person reduced the risk of recidivism by 13% for felony reconvictions and 25% for technical violation revocations, which reflects the fact that visitation generally had a greater impact on revocations, but it also impacted reconvictions. And what's interesting is they then broke down the types of visits that were being given you, clergy, family, friends. And what they discovered that the visit that was most likely to reduce recidivism rates was from clergy. Now, I don't think Louisville Presbyterian is any different than Howard or other schools. 90% of seminaries I know, if you take pastoral care, they talk about visiting the sick, but they don't talk about visiting prisoners. I mean, visiting the sick is mandatory stuff. Visiting prisoners, you're on your own. First time I went to visit a prisoner, I was on my own. I went down to the jail. I thought it was like the hospital. I tried to get in. The sheriff said, Reverend, it doesn't work like that. You don't just show up and do a visit. It's not a hospital. I didn't know. Never been trained, never been taught, never been shown. And what's interesting is that there are more incarcerated people in America than there are people in hospitals. There are 2.1 million correctional beds in America. There are 984,000 hospital beds in America. Yet every seminary requires us to learn how to visit the sick, but no one talks about visiting prisoners. Nobody talks about visiting the incarcerated. Clergy visits, according to this 5-year longitudinal study, have the most significant impact in terms of reducing recidivism. Not clergy preaching, not Sunday night service, not a Bible study, no, a visit, right? Like a visit, regular visit. Number 2 on the list was fathers, believe it or not. Number 3 on the list was siblings. Number 4 on the list was in-laws. Mothers came in 5th. So whenever I have the chance to talk to seminary folk, I say we need to be incorporating visiting the incarcerated in our curriculum just as clearly as we do visiting the sick. They're in the same list in Matthew 25. And while we're on the subject of visitation, women, this is the first time you've seen numbers, by the way, but why is that? Because numbers don't mobilize people. If we want to mobilize the church, don't give them numbers. Don't give them all that, well, the United States has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. That doesn't mobilize anything. Stories mobilize, personal trials mobilize, putting a face on it. Numbers do not mobilize, names do. Stories mobilize, not statistics. Facts and figures don't mobilize, faces do. There's your Baptist alliteration in a Presbyterian seminary, okay? You need names, not numbers, stories, not statistics, faces, not facts and figures. But I will slip this one number in here that the female pop of incarcerated women has risen by 839% since 1977. There were 12,000 women in prison in 1977. By 2012, the number rose to well over 100,000. And whenever someone says to me that their daughter has been locked up, I always say, what's his name? Because the research also shows that most women who are incarcerated as a result of relationships with men, whether it's a father, a husband, a boyfriend. And I could during the Q&A, if you want to talk more about that, we'd be glad to do that. Two-thirds of them are mothers of minor children. 60% of them at some point in their lives have been victimized, and up to 80% are on some form of self-medication. And why did I put them here in the presentation? Because they are the least visited population of incarcerated persons. Women get far fewer visits than do men. And so if we're talking about staying connected and building relationships, this is a good place to start, an important place to start. What can we do as faith leaders? We can identify partner leaders, other churches to work along with us. We can create a prayer circle and be involved in intercessory prayer. Um, One of the things I'm doing now, I got a grant from the Calvin Institute for Worship, and I'm studying worship patterns in churches that are socially active to have justice ministries. And one of the things I notice in their inner morning prayers and their intercessory prayers and their pastoral prayers and their invocations, they're always remembering persons who have been incarcerated or who are incarcerated. It's in their prayer language. And it's not, watch this, it's not, Lord, go by the prison. They don't send God there, right? They pray directly for those people, and they visit them, and they have them come and speak when they come home. Craft the vision and share the story. There are sermons. I just gave you 12 examples of how incarceration is a factor, and criminalized behavior is a factor in our basic texts, right? And I left some of it out. It's always fascinated me, for example, that when in Acts 16, when Paul goes to prison, right after they deliver the young enslaved girl, um, they lock up the Jews and let the Greeks go. That probably never looked at it that way, but the two Greek guys get off. Just the Jewish guys go to prison. At any rate, but there's so much you can mine from the text. Um, but the one thing I want you to pull out of this list here is identifying affected families. And one of the ways that I recommend, and you see the picture of it, is when I preach, I do an altar call for families of the incarcerated. And I've never had an empty altar. The Lord has sent people to the altar in every church I've ever preached around this topic. Black church, white church, small church, large church. The smallest number of people who have ever come to the altar has been 9, and that was in a church with 12 people. The largest number was 400. And my theory is, my thinking is that they may have been shamed, but if you create space, they have to express the disenfranchised grief. They're waiting for someone to create the space to say, my son is locked up and I'm hurt. My daughter's locked up and I'm hurting. My dad's locked up and I'm hurting. Never had an empty altar. This is a church in Paterson, New Jersey, where I used to live. The whole front, all these people that are standing have somebody in prison. This is a response to an altar call. Congregations can be present and listen. It's a matter of the same kind of pastoral care we provide to the sick, right? Um, and then some specific kinds of things, assisting with transportation to facilities, traveling with families to facilities, helping incarcerated persons and families stay in touch. I really need to change some of the language here, but that's my bad. I recognize it. Um, there are resources for children of the incarcerated. If you don't know, Sesame Street has a whole web page for children of the incarcerated. Alex, the puppet with the blue hair, is the son of an incarcerated father, and he's been a regular on Sesame Street for the last 10 years. Um, the Prison Alphabet is a coloring book, one of a number of resources to use that can be used by a caregiver to explain to a child why their parent is away or what life is like for them while they're away. The Amachi Mentoring Program was developed 25 years ago to put the caring adults into the lives of children of incarcerated men and women. And as we continue to connect with the people who have the personal trials, then the public policy issues become more clear. The need for alternative sentencing, the need to address conditions of confinement, the need to improve rehabilitation of facilities, developing reentry strategies and solutions, supporting educational initiatives. We're finally beginning to get colleges and some seminaries into prisons. We had 12,000 college programs in prisons until the mid 90s when the Clinton crime bill and various reactionary state measures pulled public funding out of college for incarcerated people, and the number of degree programs went down in the mid 90s from 12,000 to 7, not 7,000, 7. I taught in one of them, New York Theological Seminary. Now, with the Second Chance Pell Grants, those numbers are beginning to go back up again. So, what is you should be working on when you connect with the lives of those who are impacted, when you identify the families in the church who have somebody that's in the system, the issues become clear because every public issue is the amalgam of personal trials. You begin to identify barriers to reentry, problems with facility visitation. What are the issues that are surrounding probation and parole? What kinds of resource issues do we have in terms of helping people with jobs and housing and substance abuse? What kinds of educational options are available on the outside once a person returns? What are the employment challenges? All of these are issues that emerge when we connect with those who are impacted. I wouldn't begin to tell a community where to start in terms of what issue. I would tell them to start with how these issues are impacted people within their own congregation, because that's what's going to make something sustainable. That's what's going to make a movement last. That's what's going to put a movement into the DNA of a congregation, as opposed to this is the pastor's pet project, which then changes as soon as you change pastors. So no big finish. Thanks for the half hour. I'd love to have conversation. Look forward to seeing what we can talk about um, going through this. I did mention that I am formerly incarcerated, and I curious people, what did you do? I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I'm allergic to alcohol. When I drink, I break out in handcuffs. Okay, well, there's your big finish. But Dr. Prelo, however you want to handle the Q&A, I'm happy to do it.
Well,
Conversation.
first, we want to thank you for your very informed conversation about the Black church and criminal justice and the criminal justice system. You certainly have given us a lot to think about, but you also given us a lot of resources and resourcing. So we're grateful for your presence with us this evening and also sharing with us about the Black Congregational Resource Center. The ideal is, regardless of what seminary or church we may find ourselves in, we're all called to the same work. As you have been sharing, before we open it up into conversation, I've been thinking about the diversity of students that we have at Louisville Seminary, especially our students in our marriage and family therapy program. They're all being trained to be clinicians in diverse settings. And so I am also thinking about courses in our curriculum related to pastoral care. And it makes me wonder, we have students serving in hospitals, but I'm certainly thinking now more broadly about the ways in which we can create field education experiences and intentional formation for our students around providing spiritual care. I'm broadening it by saying spiritual care to those who are incarcerated and the families, right? So often we don't think about the family. So what you have given us tonight it's such a rich conversation. And so we really want to be mindful that we are not only thinking about those who are incarcerated, but the whole community that are impacted. And I really love and want to affirm the story that you said, wherever church you find yourself in, not just teaching about supporting broad movements of spiritual care to those on the margins, i.e., those who are incarcerated, but really thinking about the ways in which the church is not disconnected from this reality. So when we say criminal justice in the Black church, that means something very distinct. So we need to have a broader vision. So thank you for also sharing that they are a part of our community, those who have been impacted, but we don't always see because we don't always know how to serve and be a sojourner along the journey. But thank you again. Let's thank Dr. Trulear for his presentation and his words of wisdom from professional, theological, and personal experience. So thank you for sharing. So we have a few moments to share, but want to open the floor up for conversation and dialogue. Dr. Trulear is here with us for about another 20 minutes, so we want to hear from you about any questions that you might have. Any affirmation for the work that he has shared this evening. And he certainly has about 3 books that have been published, and we will follow up and send an email so that you all have resources so that you can also share those resources with your congregation. In addition, I would love to have follow-up conversation with you, Dr. Trulear, about perhaps a lifelong learning workshop here at Louisville Seminary. Our director of lifelong learning, Dr. Marcus Hong. We're always wanting to collaborate with educators and theologians around the work that we are all called to. So the floor is open. Any remarks or comments or questions? Anyone? No questions. I'm sure Chaplain Michelle Reynolds, full transparency, Chaplain Michelle
Hi,
Reynolds used to
Dr.
be.
Prelo. It's good to see you. I miss you.
You too.
Nah, I'm a little tired.
Well, first,
I'm,
congratulations on your recent
thank you.
graduation from Howard Divinity School. Blessings
Thank
to
you.
you. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I mean, just my background. I've been in prison ministry 25 years this year. And I'm a chaplain on the jail side and on the police side. So I've seen it all.
Very good. Very good. So I have a question for you, much in line with what Dr. Trulear has shared in your own professional experiences. How have you navigated not just caring for those who are incarcerated, but the relationship with the broader families? What can you share with us connected to what Dr. Trulear has shared about providing care for the whole community impacted by incarceration?
Um, I started prison ministry with uh, actually the pastor that led me to Christ. And he was a big proponent of prison ministry. We had a huge prison ministry at the church for, I guess, 15 years. We had over 50 volunteers that went into the jail. But like Dr. Trulli said, it does change. When I changed churches about 10 years ago, my pastor is a big proponent of prison ministry, but everybody's scared to go into jail. So I have no volunteers. I mean, I do it all myself. I mean, so prison ministry, it's a calling. I mean, everybody, I took my pastor in one time and he was like, that's it for me. I can't do this. And and I get that, but it's hard to get people to want to work in that type of ministry. When you do get them, they are very dedicated, but it is a calling. I know in my work, I give spiritual care not only to the resident, but I give it to the whole family. Because
Mm,
if they have have a relationship with their family once they get incarcerated, which is a plus, then I always give my services to the family too. So I have them where they can call me, they can call and check up on their loved one. At our jail, we have a pretty good system. The family can come in every weekend as long as they sign up and they have non-contact visits. Of course, the incarcerated person can see their attorney at any time. They have carte blanche at any time of day or night. But they also have video conferences with their
mhm,
family and children twice a month. So they, they have a lot of connection. When I compare the men and the women, Dr. Trulear is right. Women do not get that many visits because I sit up in the visiting section, so I see when they come. Women mainly get visits just from their attorney, and they don't even get that many from their attorney. They might get a attorney call, but they don't get attorney visits. Men get attorney visits 7 days a week. Whenever I'm there, it's just escort, escort, escort. And it's kind of sad. So I try to go see the women as much as I can. Excuse me. But since the pandemic, we lost most of our volunteers. Dr. Trulear used to be a volunteer. He's coming back.
Yeah, coming back. Chaplain Reynolds mentioned something really important, right? And I don't want y'all to miss it. She said prison ministry is a calling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. So is hospital ministry, but you still visit sick people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not saying that you. I'm not saying you're called to prison ministry. That the church is called to prison ministry.
Yes.
You don't have to be called to hospital chaplaincy to visit a sick person.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not even talking about prison ministry. You know, I'm talking about caring for your family. Here's one.
That's it.
Here's one.
It's your
We had a
family.
guy, pastor in New Orleans. We were working with churches in New Orleans. Pastor came up to me and he says, "Doc, um, I just went through a mentor training program, 12 weeks where they trained me to be a mentor for a returning citizen. I went to the classes for 12 weeks. And then they put my file in the computer and they matched me with a guy who was coming home from prison. And they said, Reverend, we found just the perfect guy. He said he grew up in the church, but he wants to get back in the church. And so he's looking forward to meeting you. And so they had a neutral space for them to meet, right, at McDonald's. So Rev is sitting in the McDonald's, and in walks the guy, his nephew. It was his nephew,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
He had to go through a 12-week training program to do something he could have done at the dinner table,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because because we I'm not asking folks to become chaplains.
Mm-mm.
I think you're asking us to see not see prison chaplaincy as a part of our care for the broader community. That's the point I had wanted to ask you earlier.
Family.
Right.
I'm saying
Family.
something a little different, Dr. Prelo. I'm saying that just like if my friend is in the hospital, I go to the hospital. If my friend is in prison, I want to go to prison.
Oh, I see
Right.
what you're saying.
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
don't understand why people don't want to do that. I mean,
Yeah,
Well, that
and
brought
people say they don't want, but that's a stigma thing, and we can change that.
mhm.
So that was
We
a
can
question I was
change
going
that.
to bring up, and that was Dr. Trulear. What gets in the way of our calls to go and serve and hear and care for those who are incarcerated and then the families that are associated with it? In some respects, even thinking about little children, right? Navigating, having to get on a bus because their parents or their extended family don't have transportation, so they have to get on a bus and travel from, let's say, their inner city community to where the jail is. And sometimes, as I've learned from you, Dr. Trulear, the prisons are far away because not everyone is incarcerated in the communities in which they are located at. So this has so many realities and so many impacts on families' equity around, because it is justice to think about how people serve their time, but is it also a justice issue when we think about what does it mean for children to be connected to their parents regardless of where their parents are
Right.
incarcerated? That some people are incarcerated and they're thousands of miles away. So all of these for me have also justice issues. But I want to get to the word stigma because sometimes we don't go to the hospital because we don't want to serve in a certain function in a hospital, or sometimes we don't want to go to the prison because we have fear, we have perceived connotations, or we also have some of our own stuff that we have to reconcile with. Let people do their time, they committed a crime. And so what does it even mean to share the gospel in quote unquote dark places? Does it not mean that the gospel is not shining in prison and incarcerated spaces. So what can you tell us, Dr. Trulear, about wrestling with the stigma associated with incarceration, whether it's those that are in prison or whether it's children who have family members that are incarcerated? The stigma gets in the way of our capacity to offer care and share the gospel, which I argue is the same thing.
Dr. Trulear, for one thing, people watch too many TV shows, too. Jail and prison is not like that. Sort of, but kind of, but it's not. And so people have that perception because I hear it all the time. They're like, oh, I mean, I've had my parents even say, I don't even know why you do that. Why don't you just take the key and throw it away? Because my mother and father looking at stuff that's on TV and it's not like that. But and I tell people all the time, what would you do if that was your loved one?
Yeah. Back to you, Dr. Trulear, about that
Oh,
whole Chaplain Reynolds kind of public square
yeah.
meeting.
Well, one of the things well, when I preach, right, and thank you, Dr. Prelo, for mentioning it. I don't have any shame around my criminal record. I don't. Okay, and part of that is because I'm trying to create space for other people to let them know that it's safe, right? Um, and so I think we need more stories from formerly incarcerated persons, create the space to let folks know it's safe, right? That's why for me to go back through the text and show the number of our biblical heroes who've been incarcerated and those who committed crimes, right? Moses and David and Peter, right? Framing those kinds of reframes, trying to create the space for people to self-disclose and for people to understand that these are our family members. Um, Chaplain Ralph Hughley at the Cuyahoga County Detention Center, Cleveland, Ohio, Youth Detention Center, took a group of clergy down to the jail with the kids because he was trying to get them involved. And he's like, "Those are not our kids; those are street kids." Blah blah blah. So he took them to lunch, and they're sitting in the cafeteria with the kids, and of course, all the preachers sitting at one table, right, and hunched over. There's a setup, one by one. Kids came up to him, Reverend Jones, Reverend Jones. Do I know you, son? Yeah, yeah. I used to go to your vacation Bible school. Another one pulled, Reverend Smith, Reverend Smith. Yeah, I know you. I know you. Ain't Mr. Jones, ain't Mr. Johnson on your deacon board? Yeah, that's my grandfather. Every one of those preachers sitting around that table was connected to a kid in that facility, right? When I got locked up, right? I had been a pastor. I wasn't pastoring at the time. I had been a pastor. I'm shamed, right? I'm dealing with my own shame, being a Christian, being a pastor, being an alcoholic, multiple DUIs. Here I am in jail. I'm curled up in the corner. Dude walks up and he says, "Yo, pastor, what you doing in here?" I'm
Wow.
like, "I don't know you." He says, "My name's Tyrell." I said, "I don't know no Tyrell." He said, "I used to play drums." He said, "I used to play drums in your choir." Son, I don't remember you.
Yeah.
He said, "Well, you know Miss Muriel." I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's my mom's." His mom's was my associate minister.
Yeah.
He's in jail. I was connected, right? All of our churches are connected. When we create space, right? Because this kid, he says to me, he says, Pastor, I've been having one foot in the world and one foot in the church all my whole life. And I told the Lord, if someone came in here to disciple me, that would help me turn my life around. And now you're here. Now, I don't think God sent me there. God sent me there because I was a danger on the street. But God used that to uncover the fact that there are people in there who are already connected to us that need us to walk with them, not come in and preach, but disciple, to visit, to provide what you're calling the spiritual care, Dr. Prelo. And we have to humanize them, and that's why I started with the language.
Right.
Testimony humanizes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Talking, bringing people into those spaces. One of the churches I'm studying is the Wave Christian Center in Berkeley, and they have returning citizens as a matter of course doing things in the public sphere in the congregation. The altar call. Um, we're literally fighting the shame. I'm a sociologist of religion by training. Emil Durkheim said years ago, if you take the most pristine society, you know, everybody's perfect, they will find that it is within the human condition to find something around which to stigmatize people and to create an other, right? Durkheim said that 150 years ago. So to other is human.
Mm-hmm.
And so proximity is one of the ways that we reduce shame and we reduce stigma. Bringing people face to face with formerly incarcerated people like myself, people in recovery from addiction like myself, people who are pastoring around the country who have I've given altar calls for families of the incarcerated, and I've had pastors come down to the altar,
Mm-hmm.
right? One pastor said, my brother is so far out of my life that my kids don't even know they have an uncle.
Yeah. So
He
these
said that
are
from the
real
pulpit.
realities. Yeah, real
Yeah.
realities. Yeah.
So it's really proximity is a powerful tool to reduce shame and stigma.
Thank you.
And so I think that's one thing. And then also this whole reframing the narrative. We know how to reframe narratives, right? You got you have Christians now who are, uh, supporting the legalization of marijuana. Well, that's a reframed narrative, right? I 30 years ago that you'd never see the church supporting things like that, right? But the narratives can be reframed. We know how to do that. That's what our preaching does. That's what our writing does. And
Yeah.
so um reframing the narrative, proximity, um is possible. Even like I said, even in the justice system itself, they're starting to use different kinds of language.
That's
And a lot of that here in Washington, D.C., they refer to formerly incarcerated people as returning citizens. That's the official language of the District of Columbia, right?
so humanizing. That's powerful.
Humanizing. They got that from my program. Our
Mm-hmm.
ministry, the Healing Communities Ministry, came to Washington, started working with the mayor's office on ex-offenders affairs, heard
Mm-hmm.
us call them returning citizens and said, hey, wait a minute, that's better, you
Yes.
know? And
Yes.
and to God be the glory, right? I'm not taking credit for stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but God can use the church to actually to reframe the narrative. Narratives can be reframed. If we didn't believe that before, we found out in November how you can reframe a narrative and fool a whole country. But um, we have we have that power and the power of the God of justice on our side, and I think that
Amen.
we can reframe the narrative around um, incarcerated people and begin to see their humanness. You're absolutely right, Dr. Prelo. It's about humanizing.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been a rich, rich, rich conversation. And so as we wrap up, I want to let everyone know here that I will follow up, the Black Church Studies team at Louisville Seminary will follow up to share the range of resources that Dr. Trulear has shared in the presentation this evening. And he will also let us know if he wants the presentation shared, or if there's a portion of it that you would like shared. We would certainly like to create resources. In addition, we will share Dr. Trulear's organization's contact information. Many of you in our Zoom room tonight represent other leadership roles in seminaries, theological higher education, and Black church contexts. So if there's an opportunity for you to need resources to support the care, I'm going to use care very broadly, of returning citizens, we want to connect you and resource you. These Black Faith Talks are not just conversations that are just happening and recorded that we'll use later on, but it is an opportunity for you to take what you have heard and share it in other venues. The idea really is a simple idea. It is to hear the gospel in a different kind of way, and hearing the gospel as it relates to discipling those who have been incarcerated in their families. We're not here to make judgment calls on what crime has been committed. That's not the conversation. The conversation is, how do we care? I remember growing up in the inner city community of Jersey City, New Jersey, and we had a summer youth program. I was just super excited about having my first job. But one of the field trips they took the kids on was a program called Scared Straight. I don't
Oh
even know
my
if they still
God.
Oh
have that
God.
program. But
They
first of
still
all,
get
Amen.
name alone, Scared Straight. I don't want to visit a prison if you're talking about the program title is Scared Straight. It was scary. It looks like I have some amen corners. It was in the sense that, oh my, going into a prison is scary. Now, by default, who wants to have their freedom confined, right? But I don't even know if they still do that program. I imagine a
Yeah, they
digital
do.
version.
They do.
But they do it a lot better now.
Better now, yeah.
A lot
Yeah.
better. They do wraparound. But one thing they've added in Anne Arundel County here in Maryland, they don't just go to the prison, they also take the kids to the morgue.
Oh wow, wow. Ooh.
And
Mm.
and then they take them and their parent and their mother
Uh,
to the
I'm in a
funeral
Zoom
home.
call right now. Is it vital right now?
Put your cell phone in.
I got it.
They take them and their mother to the funeral home, and they have to watch their mother make their funeral arrangements with the funeral director.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to defer that to Dr. Leslie Ann Earls about the trauma that comes along with some of these
No,
practices. I think it's
that's
traumatizing, but it can have the effect of, if you go down this pathway, then this will happen to you in terms of the behavior associated with incarceration. But it's also is traumatizing in other ways, because people who grow up that can be in the space in their professional life of offering care are kind of have to navigate their own traumas. I never was certified to become a licensed counselor. If I had more time, I probably would try to do a degree here at Louisville Seminary, but I don't have a whole lot of time. But I was a chaplain, and my chaplaincy took me into clinical context in a hospital. But I also have members in my community in New Jersey that I grew up with who were incarcerated. So it was never fully far from the realities of navigating church and society, whether I'm in academy or in the church or in the local neighborhood. It was always ever present. And as I continue to grow in my sense of leadership and calling, the resourcing that I do in my calling in Louisville Seminary, I'm always interested in how the Black church is being a response. Our conference this year, as I wrap up, was called Faith in Action, the Black Church at the, it was called Call and Response, the Black Church at the intersection of faith and action. So let's hear from Reverend Rob Moore, if you want to come on and introduce yourself. And but first, let me thank Dr. Trulear for being present with us. It's been a rich conversation, and we will follow up with resources. And so I want to thank all of you for joining us.